I want to talk about narrow-mindedness. One of the reasons is that the Dalai Lama commented to my book, Results from the Heart. We should go beyond narrow-mindedness, but based upon the warm heart, or some such expression. And it's not the easy task from one to convert from narrow-minded state to the more open-minded, warm-hearted state. The reason is fairly simple, and I think many may agree. Depends on how we grew up and what reference we have, what kids or the baby see around him or her will be the first references that get programmed into your brain, early part of your brain development, which go down deep into the unconscious part so that you don't remember those events when you're adult. But those are, I think, scientific fact, so that kids will become dentists, lawyers, kids may become lawyer, and the musician may have the music-related kids. Not always, but something kind of like a secondary DNA, if I call that. There's a basic DNA that we have, but the additional habitual pattern developed and get into our system. Just like the duck, the story of duck is that when they come out of the egg, whoever they see it's moving, they think it's mother or the parents, so that they just follow, assuming that it's the one that you need to depend on. So in case of ducks, it's not going to be easy to change that. And if you refer that as a base about the human development, how much can be corrected, if that's the right word, so that your component to misjudge the symptom of what we see in the world can be modified. And that may relate to the habitual pattern related to eating too much or alcohol or drug addiction. Those may be captured later in their life, but could be earlier, but nobody can perhaps verify. There may be more study being done, but the bottom line of the transferring change process of the habitual pattern of A to B or X to Y from the confused state or more truthful state. It's not going to be simple. So when I study, and myself too, going through the process of the change, when it comes to go beyond the cause of suffering, to find a way to live better and happily with warm heart, not confined with the pre-programmed way, the habit that we may have developed. So if I reflect my younger days, I did lots of nasty things and mischievous things and dangerous things, as if to check what's the limit. Now I'm modifying my behavior. I'm glad, not perfect, obviously, and I get into deluded state. I'm not the saint, but from where I was, I feel there was a fair amount of change in the habitual pattern of reaction to stop before that takes over. At the beginning of the change, I may notice earlier so that I don't go through that trajectory and then cut it. And I share this in Vipassana. The first day of Vipassana focused meditation on breathing, I noticed that when I saw the grasshopper flying, my breathing changed, because that image of the grasshopper is catching a big trout in Yellowstone. And I noticed that. So by noticing that before it's too late, I don't notice at the moment, because of the meditation setting and focusing on breathing, before the mind starts to click in to go into the deluded state of, oh, that was so wonderful. By the way, at the time, my friend came all the way from Michigan and we got together, and all the story can move on and on and on. Then occupy my mind to some direction, which may not be a delusion, but still is not living in the now, living in the past. And if that is the past, not just the past, but driving me to behave in a certain way, you want to cut it. Delusionary thought should be cut. That's part of the Zen saying. That's more so away from deluded thinking. And this experience of the grasshopper is very fundamental and easy to understand. So that if I have a ringing the bell, or Mr. Goenka says, security to tell you what's going wrong in my mind before my mind goes off. But that security doesn't exist. So you have to find within yourself that reaction and the drive of that beginning of the delusionary thought, which may end up in suffering, or just grabbing thing to drink or do the drug and all even the illegal bad stuff to happen. So that makes sense for the Goenka to do that meditation in India and other parts of the world in the prison, because they are the ones who have had that process of developing that bad habit without them knowing, possibly, that they are imprisoned for lifetime or even worse. And they come out of it after spending 10 days of meditation. And I'm not one of them in India, in the prison, and going through this process. I happen to be here in New Zealand and talking about it. But anybody born under the different star with the influence, without our knowing, may get to such a state. And it's a sad story. And that's why when Daisetsu says we have the responsibility as a society to make sure that they can be treated appropriately, because it's our responsibility, if we are wise enough, instead of ditching them off and throwing them out or whatever. Or it's the same as the racism, there are certain war and discrimination that can take place, which means we are not wise enough, warm-hearted, like Dalai Lama says. And that all depends on the wrong wiring and the habitual pattern developed. And some of those with a certain pattern may even get to the top of the nation, becoming the president of a big nation and become the cornerstone of what can happen in that nation. And there are many believers along with him to gang up in a way because of whatever the habitual pattern they may have developed to believe what is wrong is right. I may be saying a little too much here, but maybe not too much, because we are all conditioned beings, and the outcome is the outcome. And that's what Buddha talked about. 4 steps, 4 noble truths. We suffer, there's a reason of suffer, there's a way out of the suffer, and we find nirvana or some such thing. 4 steps. But he also said, at the awakening, he thought this is too difficult for anyone to follow or understand. Anyway, that's the story in Sutra. But then certain God came to him and begged that he should be the one to teach the people. Whether that was in the dream or what is the basis of that story, I don't know. But the certain difficulty, I can relate to that. I basically practice, the samadhi and kind of like narrow-mindedness. So let the heart take over, not the brain to take over into the abyss or wrong direction. Make sure that there's check and balance, and there's not the blockage to the heart, but connection to the heart or the way of nature that is the primary or the absolute power that brought us to exist. So instead of jumping off to tangent with whatever the habitual pattern, you go before that, how we are developed, before that kind of a conditioning happens. And if we can help that core of our being, the source of our action, connected to the laws of the universe or the laws of nature, that is to know, as if, for example, in breathing or paying attention to certain sensation in the body, then you have a connection to the source. The mind cannot grasp what that connection is, because mind has its own dimension versus nature's way it's manifesting in our existence all the time. But the mind cannot detect that. Logically they may detect, the mind and your mind can say that, but in reality of taking action, unless in the case of this grasshopper example, something may need to trigger. And that's the difficult hurdle, the barrier of how to change the habitual pattern so that we can be awakened, enlightened, not just once, but as often as possible when this deviating thought may pop up, smoking or drinking or drug or whatever, murder, stealing, lying, egotistical movement. So this is an eternal question as humans, and I may be just talking a dream, but I don't think it's a wrong dream. There could be a scientific validation. I shared in one of those talk in the 10-day meditation course, and after this, my experience of awakening, looking back and see what is the physiological change that may induce such a awakening moment. Or meditating is to help promote such a state, not just confined in one, but more related to the deep part of who we are. So you may ask, so what and what do we do? That's the answer, or the question each of us may need to look at, not to be convinced by others, because you may be already convinced in certain way, and you may not want to listen to other people's opinion. And if so, and if that's what it is, and if that's what the society is, how do we move forward? Many people came to such a way of thinking. Like I can just point one popped up. It's Lao Tzu. Yeah, right. In his book, he was asked before he went into the desert or faraway land, because he may be fed up with what was in the society. But someone blocked him and please write down your wisdom before you go. And he did. Tao Te Ching was developed, and he went, that's the story. And many people go into wilderness or nature, away from the society. But Bodhisattva's idea is while you may go in there, you want to come back to the society and do the work. That's called the Mahayana Buddhism. Hinayana is more into their secluded sense of awakened state. Less interaction with the society. But coming back, called Bodhisattva, is not going into the desert or the remote, but stay in the world to do the work. That's just a theory or idea. In reality, you can guess, maybe. But I think that's a fundamental issue for each individual, if you think that's important, and then for the society, if the society feels it's important to find the passage. Okay, last thing I can say before I wrap this up. When I see the change in the organization, nation, the passage, this morning I thought about people singing songs and sharing. Make love, not war, was the phrase I remember when the Vietnam War was taking place. And people didn't like what's going on. And instead of choosing to do some nasty thing, many people came together and start singing. In this moment, I see a fragmentation in the United States of what's going on. I don't know if that's the right word, but there's certain way of movement, but there are other way of movement. And if this heartfelt sense is shared, I was thinking, I don't sing a song, and I can't compose. Maybe I can, but not to the level. But also, there may be people, I'm thinking, there may be a composer. I don't know if Bob Dylan was one of them, or Peter, Paul, and Mary. There are people who did these things in those 1960s or whatever the time. That might be the moment we may find. And if there's any singer, a composer, or whoever can tie this thought into some movement, I was just thinking, okay, I hope that happens. Now people are gathering here and there. They may be singing. I hear certain musicians joining. I like to hear some song and people singing together, marching. Let's be optimistic, hopefully, if that's you think is something you can do. Thank you.